Even people who have been surrounded by animals all their lives can be surprised by them. When this farmer saw that his cow had given birth, his jaw dropped. The farmer and his wife couldn't believe what was happening. The calving season is always crazy, but it was unlike anything they had ever experienced. They had already had a busy day full of emotions, but now they were also in for an incredibly long night. They didn't know what was waiting for them. One of their favorite cows named Moo was in trouble. She was giving birth. They usually tried not to interfere and let nature take its course. Moo had already given birth twice, and everything was going well, but this time it was completely different. The birth was not progressing as they expected, and the cow was stressed. They needed to keep a close eye on her and help her if necessary. But when they saw that the cow had given birth, they were shocked. When they left the farm in the morning, everything was fine. This day was supposed to change the family, but they did not know that it would be in several ways. Dap and Chuck Belda loved their animals. They took extremely good care of them and provided them with everything they needed for their health. They spent most of their time caring for the animals, but this day was supposed to be a little different. Dap and Chuck quickly got through their morning chores. All the animals were fed and examined, but there was a strange excitement in the air. For a couple who loved spending time on their farm more than anything, they couldn't wait to get out of there. They needed to be in a very special place, and as soon as they were sure that all the animals were okay, they hit the road. They rushed to the hospital, and when the doors opened, they couldn't hold back their tears. Their only daughter, Jamie, was lying on the bed, and their newborn granddaughter was in her arms. It was a special moment to meet a new family member. The daughter returned home the same day, and the couple was going to help the young family on their first day at home. They spent the whole day with their daughter, granddaughter, and son-in-law. They were preparing to return home when they received a call from their manager. He wanted to tell them that he thought Moo was going to give birth. They weren't worried. The cow had already given birth twice, and she was a natural mom. They asked the manager to try to drive the cow into the barn if he could. They allowed their animals to graze freely in large pastures, but they wanted the cow giving birth to be inside, where it was warm and cozy. At the moment, the cows were close to the house and barn, as it was the calving season. It was also much colder than usual at this time of year, and they wanted the animals to be warm. The cow had already been moved closer and could easily enter inside. They knew she was going to give birth soon, as it was pretty obvious. The last time Jamie was at the farm, she noticed that Moo was very pregnant. She joked that the cow looked as pregnant as she was. Now it seemed that both of them would soon bring their bundles of joy, perhaps even on the same day. They thought the cow might give birth by the time they got home, but their manager told them that labor was slow and the cow seemed to be in trouble. He was watching her closely. Chuck and Deb were tired after a happy day, but the couple immediately headed to the barn. They needed to check it out in person. As soon as they saw Moo, they realized that she was in trouble. The cow had been in labor for some time, but was still pacing back and forth. Their manager was clearly right. Their family would definitely expand that night, but they needed to keep a close eye on the cow and make sure that she would be all right. They saw that it was going to be a long night, but they had no idea what was waiting for them. Another hour passed, and finally signs of a calf began to appear. When this farmer saw that his cow had given birth, his jaw dropped. The calf that was born was tiny, one of the smallest they had ever seen. They couldn't believe it when the calf showed signs of life, but then the cow moaned again and they understood the reason for her big pregnancy. The cow was giving birth to twins. It was amazing. They had already had pairs of twins on the farm, but it was always exciting. She gave birth to a second baby, who was as tiny as his brother or sister, and they were glad to see that the baby was healthy too. But then their delight turned to shock. The mother cow was still giving birth. Both Deb and Chuck have lived with cows all their lives. In fact, They lived on a farm that had been in Chuck's family for generations. But on this day, they saw something they had never seen before. The cow eventually gave birth to a total of 4 calves. It was incredible. All 4 black calves were alive, and they were adorable. It was really sweet, but it was also really dangerous. The cow has already beaten all the odds that day. The family obviously didn't know this at the time, but these births were even rarer than they thought. The probability of a cow having 4 children is 1 in 700 whole thousandths. It's mind-blowing, but even more rare that all 4 calves will live to be born and outlive it. The probability that all 4 will be born alive is only about 1 in 11.2 million. It was amazing that they survived, but the couple quickly realized that this would only be the beginning of their difficult journey, not the end of it. The calves could survive at birth, but they had a long way to go to reach adulthood. The first step is to see if the mother cow can take care of everyone. They thought it was unlikely that she would have enough milk to take care of 4, and might have to take some calves. But what they did not expect was that the calves would not be able to drink milk from their mother at all. They tried, but they couldn't get sucked in. This began to annoy the cow, and she walked around trying to push away the hungry calves, and Deb and Czech were afraid that she would trample them. They took the calves and blew her out instead. They realized that the calves were probably too young to drink milk from their mother. They were curious to find out how small the calves were and were surprised by the results. Usually a calf weighs about 50 to 70 pounds at birth, but these babies were much smaller. Each of them weighed only about 25 pounds. They were small and fragile, and without their mother's milk, they wouldn't have gotten much bigger. As in humans, colostrum is first released in cows after childbirth. This nutritious product is much healthier than regular milk. It contains many antioxidants and antibodies that help the newborn get the first impulse in life. They milked the mother cow, hoping to get enough colostrum to feed 4 calves. They were so small and fragile that they needed all possible help, otherwise none of them would survive the first day. But after milking, it became clear that there was only enough milk for 1 or 2 calves. How do they choose who will eat? The sun was already rising, and they needed to come up with a plan. On farms, your neighbors are far away, but often they become like a family. They fed the calves with the milk they had collected and set to work. They called all the neighbors they could remember to help save the 4. Everyone was shocked to hear about the 4 calves, but few could help. When the calves were born on their farms, they let their mothers take care of them on their own. No one could give Malozev away from their calves. It seemed hopeless, and when they looked at the 4 black calves in front of them, they began to doubt if they were fighting a losing battle. They desperately wanted to save at least some of them. Then a tragedy happened, which became a salvation for their calves. A neighboring farmer lost 2 calves after their mothers unexpectedly began to give birth. They weren't ready yet, and due to an unusual cold surge, the prematurely born calves didn't survive, but their mothers were fine. This allowed the farmer to give them out and send the colostrum to Chuck and Deb. They could feed the little ones. All 4 calves received enough food to fill their bellies and become stronger. It seemed like a miracle. If you've ever cared for a newborn, whether human or animal, you know it's a lot of work, and when it's 4 newborns in need of your care, that's 4 times as much work. They had to bottle feed 4 calves around the clock for several weeks. They had 4 babies, completely dependent on their care and attention. Their story went viral and people were excited about this cute story. They received letters and messages from people all over the world. They even got an album about calves. But, as Deb joked a few weeks later, instead of messages, she would prefer people to offer to come and feed the calves at night. Deb and Chuck took care of the calves themselves, and it was a lot of work, but it paid off. The calves began to grow and grow stronger. They survived the first few weeks of their lives and beat all the odds. It was incredible. No one thought that all four of them would be able to survive for so long. It wasn't easy. All the other chores on the farm still needed to be done, and since both Deb and Chuck were farmers who were actively working, most of this work was done by them. It didn't stop just because they had four new babies who depended on them. They had to keep going. Besides, they still had a newborn granddaughter they wanted to spend time with. The days were full of things to do. They started their duties early in the morning, starting with feeding 4 calves, then worked on the farm and ended the morning feeding the babies again. After that, they had 4 hours to go and see their daughter and her baby. They enjoyed all these special moments before returning home to feed the calves again. Even at night, they had to go out to the barn at least twice to feed the calves. No wonder they were exhausted. By the time the calves turned 1 month old, they had overcome the biggest challenge, but could their own exhaustion be the reason they would let the calves down now? They refused to allow it. They would have done anything to get through it, but Chaika had a plan to make things a lot easier if he could implement it. He worked for several days in his workshop on a special project. He didn't tell anyone what he wanted to do because he wasn't sure he could do it. A few days later, he invited Deb to see what he had done. It was a cattle farm and they didn't have the same equipment as dairy farms, but he wanted to create something that would suit them. It was perfect. The bottle feeding station had 4 places where babies could stand. 4 bottles could be loaded into the bottle holders, and they could even expand to hold larger bottles as the calves grew. Then you just had to put the babies in place and tilt the bottle holder. All 4 could be fed at the same time, and no one needed to hold the bottle. This would reduce the time spent feeding all 4 of them. Deb almost burst into tears when she saw it. Now they could feed the babies while continuing their business. They no longer had to spend time feeding each of them every 4 hours. Instead of at least an hour or 40 minutes spent on each feeding, they only needed about 10 minutes. It was amazing, and the best part was that now only one of them had to go out at night to feed the babies. If they alternated, they could have had much more time to rest. They continued to take care of the kids, but they weren't so exhausted anymore. The calves continued to grow, and people even sent gifts for the 4 little ones. They soon became much bigger and eventually became ordinary adults, but they weren't exactly ordinary. These calves remained special to the Dep and the Chaika. They had a lot of animals, and usually they couldn't call each newborn calf by name. Moreover, it was a cattle farm, and these animals are not kept as pets. They are looked after and monitored, but you can't get too attached. But it was too late for the quadruplets. Dap and Chuck raised them and spent many hours caring for them. How can you not get attached by doing this? These 4 would remain on their farm for life, and were treated more like beloved family members than cattle. Their story began with a special birth. It is unknown if they will be able to survive, and now they live a pampered life, which is certainly a happy ending. Can you get attached to farm animals? Share your thoughts in the comments. Join us again for even more incredible stories.